Good evening all and welcome to our channel. Tonight, we bring you 5 most disturbing true Yellowstone Park Ranger horror stories. Yellowstone National Park, one of the most breathtaking places on Earth. But behind the beauty lies something far darker. For more than a century, this wilderness has swallowed people whole, witnessed unexplainable encounters, violent attacks, and tragedies so disturbing that many were quietly buried in old ranger reports and forgotten files. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the real horror stories of Yellowstone. The disappearances without footprints, the screams in the night, the bodies found where bodies shouldn't be, and the things lurking in the timberline that no one can explain. If you're ready to explore the true darkness inside America's most iconic national park, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear isn't folklore. It's real. And once you know these stories, you will never look at Yellowstone the same way again. The shoe turned in the steam like a small, ridiculous island. I saw it first because my job trains you to notice the wrong things, the little human artifacts that insist they belong where they have no right. It bobbed at the edge of Abyss Pool, half submerged, rubber sole dark with mineral film and a lace trailing like a doubtful tongue. For a long moment, I merely watched the way the steam lifted from the water and shuffled itself into the pines, the way the colors of the bacteria glowed like malignant aurora beneath the surface. Then something else broke the rim of the shoe, a pale, wrong portion of a foot, a thumb-sized bit of bone, a wedge of tissue the water had not yet finished polishing. I was trained for protocol, and I knew the steps by heart, but the world at that instant narrowed to the stupidly simple fact that a piece of a human had made itself visible out of a boiling pool. You learn fast that procedure is a kind of armor. We did what we were taught: erect tape, keep crowds back, photograph from the safe boards. The other ranger radioed through to dispatch in clipped sentences, his voice a machine learning how not to tremble. We took photographs, logged the coordinates, called for the forensic team. Every action seemed inadequate by virtue of being too small to cover the enormity of what the eye had seen: a limb in a pool that was not a pond, but a chemistry set laid open. There is a particular sharpness to the knowledge that the pool eats. It reduces flesh to elements and leaves you the grotesque joke of an extremity, a lone shoe, the scattered domesticity of a life made meaningless by a precise, indifferent heat. The pool had always been dangerous. That's the kind of thing the brochures say in polite font. Stay on boardwalks. Do not venture off the trail. Thermal waters can cause severe burns. The language is meant to keep your attention in a society of disclaimers. But warnings become wallpaper when you carry your own hunger and curiosity. People walk quietly along the boardwalks, telling themselves they understand nature and how to behave within it, as if the world is a museum with clear rules. Then, a human thing leaves the path, and the museum becomes a place of finality. They called it in as a recovery more than an investigation. The pool had taken the rest. Our divers were useful only for what they could coax from an environment that resists retrieval. The water is such a solvent of evidence that bones can be left and yet everything else vanish. It is the kind of place forensic people speak of with a low kind of awe. Not that a pool could be malevolent, but that the chemistry of the earth will accomplish in minutes and hours what the hands of men cannot undo in decades. The divers lowered cameras and hooks, and the mechanical tenderness of their gear. The images came back green and wavering, and then the pale of bone like a small moon. They recovered what they could. There are things you do not unsee. A gloved hand lifting a shoe and finding, tucked into its depth like a cruel secret, the whitened arc of a human toe. I remember the lab announcements as if they were part of the weather. A voice over the radio delivered by someone I had never met, clinical and soft at once. DNA testing matched the samples with a name on an emergency contact form: Il-hun Ro. He had parked his car and not returned. His family called, and then the calls stopped because time has the bad habit of grinding itself into the spaces where hope lived. They wanted the narrative we are trained to supply: the how, the why, the story that makes a calamity into something you can put in a sentence and carry home. But the facts that matter with thermal pools are often unsatisfying. He had been here. His vehicle was at the lot. His belongings were in the car. A shoe had drifted. A foot surfaced. The rest of the world is erosion and rebuke. It is not fiction to say that the pool takes with relentless efficiency. These hydrothermal features are not interested in drama. They operate on gradients of pressure and temperature, on acids and dissolved silica, and they have been doing it for geological time. But human imagination is allergic to impersonal answers. We prefer villains we can name. We want stories where cause is a person, not a chemistry. So investigators look for the narrative hooks. Was there foul play? Was someone else present? Did he slip? Had he been overcome by some sudden illness? The answer that settled into the files was accidental, meant to close a door. It never satisfied anyone who was not the one who had lost him. I had my own private sequence of imaginings, which I do not always tell the families because air can become a responsibility. I imagined the small moments, the man stepping off the boardwalk to get a better plane of composition for a photograph, the crust underfoot, brittle and thin, a lie made to look like solid ground, a foot's edge giving under a weight that considered the minerals as a mere stage. Or, darker in some ways, I imagined he had meant to be absent from his life. The earth is obscene in the ways it refuses to choose between those possibilities. For the investigators, there were practical things to do. Check his digital footprints, call associates, parse the afternoon weather, but the only concrete thing the pool gave us was its appetite. There is a peculiar irony that lives in a place like Abyss. It is gorgeous in a way that demands observation, and that beauty invites a particular kind of human hubris. Travelers come here wanting to feel themselves part of something sacred. They close their eyes at dawn and imagine their small lives nested within an ancient patience. It offers grandeur and the assurance of scale. But there are edges to those assurances. The same mineral that paints the spring in molten color also makes a place that will unmake skin and bone. Human bodies are not holy things. They are walking collections of proteins and minerals that break down under certain conditions. We have the arrogance to dress nature in meaning, and then nature, indifferent, strips the metaphor away. After the extraction, there is a choreography of grief that the park must perform. We bring people to a place where they can mourn without treading on unstable ground. We answer questions, hand tissues like props in a play, file reports so the bureaucracy has language to measure loss. We close the immediate area for the family's privacy and for the sanitation of the site. People sent flowers, small, foolish things in the face of an element that had already reduced a man to a fragment. They wanted memorials, evidence, anything to bind absence. We offered what the law and the land allowed: identification, the recovery of what could be recovered, an option for ceremony under the pines. The family came and stood at the edge where the boardwalk gives a wider view, faces pale as the mineral mats in the pool below. They did not ask for explanations that would not be given. They wanted to see the place where he had last been, to make that corporeal connection that humans use to keep the dead from evaporating into memory. We steered them gently because the crust near the pool is not to be trusted. It is a brittle, deceptive thing that will break and make you part of the chemistry without vindictiveness. They left small tokens at the ranger station: photos, a note, a careworn thermos. We took the tokens and put them in a folder. They are evidence of love and not evidence in any forensic sense. Sometimes the families ask if there was anything we could have done. Now, the question is tender in that empty way grief often is. We answer with the kind of truth that is also a small lie, that we did everything within our means, that we acted quickly, that the land does terrible things sometimes without human culpability. Of course, it is unsatisfying. People who lose someone do not want the universe to be indifferent. They want a moral architecture that can be punished. The earth, being older than morality, declines to be disciplined. For my part, there is a sentence that returns to me sometimes when the steam is thick and the park is quiet, the image of a shoe turning a pool that eats things. I often stand at the boardwalk in the evenings when the tourist vans have parked and the stars are clear and a cold quality settles on the pines. The pool is a living thing then, slightly magnified in the dark, the bacteria-like nocturnal jewelry. It feels as if, below the surface, the water is sorting through what people have brought into its realm and deciding what to keep and what to return in small gestures. A shoe, a piece of cloth, a bone that will be found by the hands of the living. The pool is not a monster that relishes cruelty. It simply follows the math of heat and mineral. The distinction matters to the heart, which is not mathematical. There are practical consequences to the event. We doubled the signage in that basin for a while and did more patrols. We held town meetings where the park's risks were discussed and made the radio rounds with public safety messages. These are small stitches on a landscape that will hold its own memories long after people have stopped making pamphlets. Fireflies will crawl their phosphorescence across the meadows and children will run where someone once stepped off solid ground. That is the heartbreaking thing about beauty. People come to record it, to be close to it, and sometimes the closeness is fatal. I find myself thinking about the man's hands because that is how I make a person live on the edge of memory. Hands carry the story of a life in the calluses and the direction of their fingers. They had taken pictures, they had packed a thermos, they had driven an hour to feel the wound of wildness. For all that people tell me about policy and signs and the sad fact of erosion, there is a small human truth that will not be excused by geological statements. People go to places like Abyss because they want to feel part of the Earth's small theatrics. We desire communion and scale. Sometimes the Earth answers in ways that are not about meaning. Some nights I wake with a picture in my head, the shoe caught in currents of steam, the pale hint of flesh like a fossil being uncovered, the hush of men and women who do not know what to say. I can feel the acrid smell stay in my nostrils, sulfur, and the iron tang of something finished. There is a peculiar loneliness in being the one to bear witness in a place that refuses witnesses. You gather a few facts and file them carefully, and then you stand aside while people build stories to hold the sorrow. Those stories are good. People need them as shelter, but they are not the same as the cold, indifferent fact that a pool will, if given the chance, remove a human body to its chemical constituents. In the months that followed, other visitors would pause at the rim of Abyss and peer at the colors in the steam and feel small and reverent. I would guide them away gently, sometimes telling the same rehearsed joke about the pool's appetite, sometimes letting the silence speak for itself. There are those who keep their distance and those who do not. The human dialectic with risk is not new. We know the statistics and pretend they are irrelevant until they are not. The pool will continue to be what it is, gorgeous, dangerous, eternal, on a scale we pretend to understand. At the end of my shift, when the ranger station goes quiet and the day's files are locked in a cabinet, I sometimes walk back to the edge. The shoe is gone now, dissolved or removed, such tokens easy to erase. But the memory of seeing that small, silly human artifact turn in the steam stays like a shard. We make memorials for people, small hardened things like plaques. But the real memorial is the list of names on worn paper in the file drawer, the faces we keep, the photographs we hand back to families. The land will not accept moral accounts. It only concedes data and forgets the rest. We, the fragile species with elaborate languages, do the remembering for it. When asked later if I had faith that the world would ever make sense of the event, I could not lie. I could not lie. I said that nature is not malicious, but also not merciful. It does not reckon with our narratives. It simply is. That is the horror that will not leave me. The clarity that something enormous and ancient reduced a life to a fragment and washed the rest away. We did all the things we were trained to do, which is to say we managed it with professional coldness and human tenderness. We told the family what we could, and then I sent them the photographs that had to be sealed away in reports. There are lessons in all this for sure. Stay on boardwalks, heed the signs, keep your dogs leashed. But rules read flat on a page are a poor salve for the fact that some mixtures of curiosity and geology end with a person being taken by something that will not care if they were good or bad, cautious or reckless. The pool offers no judgment, only dissolution. You stand at the rim and feel a sudden, dizzy sensation of being too small in a place that does not measure smallness by sentiment. Sometimes, late in the night when the steam is thicker than sound, I dream of the shoe. It turns and then dissolves into color, and for a second, all the world looks like the inside of a geode. The dream is not comforting. It is precise and beautiful and remorseless. I still wake up some nights thinking I hear the tearing canvas splitting, fabric ripping open in the dark. My mind gives the sound a shape, a texture, even a temperature. It is always colder in memory than it was in reality. Colder, sharper, and impossibly final. Back then, before any of us knew what fear meant, we were simply a group of friends heading into the Yellowstone backcountry with more confidence than experience. There were 5 of us, my partner and me, a couple named Brigida and Thomas, and a seasonal ranger named Paul who had agreed to accompany us for a 2-night loop. We packed light, walked slow, and told ourselves the wilderness was meant to be admired, not feared. Even the silence had felt friendly that first day, a kind of soft space in which our ordinary anxieties dissolved. By evening, the temperature dropped fast and the sky emptied of color. We pitched our tents in a clearing framed by dense lodgepole pine. The fire ban forced us to cook on small stoves. The blue flame glowed like a signal in the deepening dusk. When dinner ended, we washed our bowls in a creek that made quiet, glassy sounds over the stones. Everything felt peaceful, timeless, whole. Brigida went to bed early. She always did on hikes. Sun, tired, soft-spoken, slipping into her sleeping bag long before the rest of us settled. Before zipping the tent, she told us good night in her half-whisper, the kind that somehow made the trees themselves seem gentler. I waved at her from the stump where I sat, tightening my bootlaces. I didn't know that would be the last uncomplicated gesture either of us would make. The rest of us stayed up a bit longer, our voices low. Ranger Paul checked the perimeter with his red flashlight, pausing every so often to listen. That habit of his, the sudden stillness, should have warned us, but we were too ignorant to interpret it. He belonged to the woods in a way we did not. He heard things we hadn't learned to hear. Around 11, we crawled into our tents. My partner fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing deep, steady. The night air was cold enough to sharpen the sounds around us. Small branches ticking high above, distant water whispering along stones, wind gliding between the pines. I drifted off, believing the dark was harmless. The first sound woke me with a start. A rip. Short, violent, unmistakable. My heart lurched. I sat upright, straining to hear. My partner shifted beside me, half asleep, mumbling something incoherent. I pressed my hand gently over his mouth, not to silence him, but because I needed to confirm the world was still real. The fabric of our tent was intact. No shadows moved along its walls. Then came the second sound, a cry, human. Brigida's. The terror in it wasn't fully formed yet, not a scream, not even a plea. Just the startled, disbelieving shock of a person woken by the impossible. I unzipped the tent before my mind caught up with my body. Cold air struck my face like a blow. Ranger Paul was already outside, flashlight in hand, throwing beams wildly through the trees. The dragging came next. A wet, rhythmic pull across the earth, heavy enough to compress the pine needles into a long, distorted path. Something large, something purposeful, hauling something else. Brigida. I ran toward her tent. The flap hung open, shredded so cleanly it was as if the knife that cut it had never existed in this world. Inside, her sleeping bag lay twisted, half pulled toward the tree line. Dirt and leaves scattered across the nylon floor in a desperate, chaotic spray. Ranger Paul cursed, a single shaking word. He shouted her name. The darkness swallowed it whole. We followed the dragging sounds until they dissolved into the trees. Each breath hurt. My bare feet slipped on damp needles. My mind kept extending the last sound she made, turning it into something it never had time to become. Flashlight beams danced over disturbances in the ground, branches snapped, soil overturned. And there, under the sharp white circle of Paul's beam prints, bear prints, huge ones. The logic was simple and monstrous. A grizzly had taken her, somehow, for reasons we would never understand. Bears don't behave that way, attacking a zipped tent, dragging a human deep into the woods. Predatory bear attacks were rare. Taking prey alive? Rarer still. But there they were, prints running alongside the drag marks, unmistakable and horribly clear. We called for her again. Silence answered. Within minutes, Paul ordered us back to camp. Not from cowardice. His voice trembled with urgency, not fear, but because he knew the truth none of us wanted spoken. "You're no good to her dead," he said, grabbing my arm. I hated him for the sentence when he said it. Years later, I understand it was the only thing that kept any of us alive. We waited for the search team in a cluster near the extinguished stove flames, our flashlights held outward like thin, fragile shields. Every sound carried a threat. Every shadow shifted wrong. Somewhere beyond the reach of light, something cracked wood or bone. I couldn't tell. The search team arrived just before 2 a.m. A sweep began. Rangers, dogs, lights fanning into the timber. We followed, desperate to help, but whenever we drifted too close, they pushed us back with gentle, practiced firmness. "Let us do our jobs," they said. "Stay safe." I hated every second of it. Around 3, the dog found a place where the soil was disturbed. A tuft of hair, hers, caught on a low branch. A streak of blood on the bark, darker than the night around it. We pushed on. The ground grew rockier, the tracks grew faint. Bears can disappear into terrain humans cannot read. At dawn, the searching paused for a formal briefing. Ranger Hartwell spoke plainly, firmly. "We expand the grid. We bring in more teams. We will find her. No one said alive." By mid-morning, volunteers arrived. My partner and I joined a civilian search group. We moved slowly and deliberately through terrain that felt increasingly hostile, not because of wildlife, but because the forest held an emptiness that felt deliberate. We found signs: disturbed earth, a thread of fabric, bear scat still warm, but not her. Around 2 p.m., a ranger shouted for attention. We hurried toward him, hearts vaulting with hope that evaporated the moment we saw what lay in the dirt. A patch of ground painted with blood, not pooled, smeared, brushed across the soil as though something had been dragged over it. And there, half hidden beneath a fern, a boot print, human, not belonging to anyone from our group. Not belonging to any ranger, older than our arrival. Hartwell's face tightened. 2 rangers exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. "What does it mean?" I asked. Hartwell did not lie. "We don't know yet." But her eyes betrayed her. This was not a typical wildlife attack. We pressed onward. The dog found more hair, more tracks, more drag marks, but then the trail led to a cluster of fallen logs and stopped. The space beneath the deadfall was churned, clawed, torn apart. Something large had wrestled there, scraped up through the tangle. Pieces of her shirt were caught in the splintered wood, and the smell, God, a sour sweetness, a copper tang, rot still in its first breath. A piece of flesh clung to a bark shard, small, unmistakable. The dog whimpered, tail tucked, not because of the human scent, because of something else, something that had been there. Hartwell ordered a perimeter search. Teams spread out, radios crackled. A shout came from farther upslope. More blood, no body. We converged, breath ragged. The clearing above the drainage was silent in the way terrible places often are, as if everything that could scream had already done so. There, in the center of trampled brush, lay another patch of blood. Deeper, older. The ground matted down as though something heavy had rolled or struggled before being lifted. 15 feet away, placed neatly beside a rock, stood a single boot, her boot, upright, clean, arranged. No bear in the world would do that. Hartwell whispered, "We have to move now." And just then, the forest shifted. A shape moved beyond the tree line, large, low, too smooth to be bear, too large to be human. The dog barked once, a sharp, terrified sound. Then someone screamed. A volunteer, running downslope in blind panic. The shape changed direction instantly, like a shadow folding itself. The scream cut off mid-breath. We ran. Branches clawed our faces. Rocks rolled beneath our boots. Adrenaline chewed logic to shreds. My lungs burned with cold air. My partner pulled me forward each time I stumbled. Behind us, the forest made a sound I have never heard again. A heaving, breath-like exhale, as though the land itself was drawing something in. We did not stop until the floodlights of the command camp cut through the haze. The rangers at the perimeter looked horrified as we staggered into the light. "Where's the volunteer who ran?" one asked. No one answered. The silence was enough. That night, no one slept. Floodlights burned against the dark as if we could hold it back by force. Radios whispered bad news. More tracks, more blood, no bodies. Hartwell sat beside me in the dim light. Her voice was low, raw. "We're calling off the rescue," she said. "This is now a recovery." I nodded, numb. "Do you know what took her?" I asked. She feared the question more than I feared the answer. "No," she said. "And I don't think we want to." I thought that was the end of it. I thought knowing she was gone was the worst truth I would ever carry. But I still hear that dragging sound at night. I still see the boot standing upright. And I still wonder about the shape that moved through the trees with a purpose no animal should know. Whatever took Brigitte didn't finish with her. It finished with the silence. And some nights, when the world is too quiet, I swear I hear something just beyond the edge of sound, waiting to drag someone else into the dark. Aden Valley has the particular temper of places that breed both awe and arrogance. It is a long bowl of grass and steam where, on certain mornings, the light slides over bison backs like the edge of a promise and the air tastes like river and mineral. Photographers come here like pilgrims with lenses like relics and a quiet hunger for moments that make the world look like a thing of holy clarity. William Tuschinski is one of them. He moves through the valley the way a hunter moves, patient, deliberate, remembering the virtues of waiting. He knows the quiet rituals of the place, the way to set a tripod so it does not sink, the etiquette of not startling the animals, the small mathematics of distance that turns enormous creatures into friendly spectacles only when respect is paid. On that morning, he wears the look of a man who has measured many dawns and chosen this one for particular reasons he has not yet explained even to himself. He sets up on a low knoll, a vantage point he has used before. His lenses are 3 and precise, a wide angle to catch the sweep of the valley, a mid-range to frame a single moving shoulder of bison, and the long reach, the one that brings detail out of distance. He is careful with his gear the way a surgeon is careful with instruments, tape, lens caps, a small hand towel tucked into a pocket to wipe condensation. Around him, steam rises from the ground in slow, dignified pillars that turn the visible world into an impressionist painting. The herd grazes like a slow tide. There is no urgency. Hayden will give you your picture if you will wait, and William waits because waiting is how he knits a life. He notices the light first, the brittle kind of sun that falls across fur and makes it sing. It comes in threads, and it finds a young bull with a shoulder like a sculpted cliff. William shifts his tripod 3 degrees, adjusts focus, counts his exposures in a hush. The shutter sound is small and private. He is alone in the way a man becomes alone when he tasks himself with making the world stop for the ephemeral pleasure of catching it mid-motion. No one remembers the instant the world tilted. That is often the way these things happen, not with fanfare, but with the accumulation of small errors and the complacency of familiarity. A breeze shifts its posture, a calf staggers, a bull lowers its head and tests the air. There is no alarm in the animals until there is. They are living beings with their own logic. In the single, compressed time of that change, the geometry of distance collapses. William moves a shade closer for a tighter frame. He does not think himself close enough to hurt his chances, only to improve them. A foot of distance becomes an ounce of risk, and the world, which was calmly arranged, yields. When the attack comes, it reads like a snapped cord. It is quick and sudden, and therefore leaves witnesses with the uneasy certainty that the earth itself moved without notice. One instant, William is composing. The next, there is a sound, something like the thud of a great thing on earth, the bison herd shifting like a single mind. People later say the sequence is so short it is almost cinematic, the flash of a grizzly's silhouette, the sound of a mass of fur colliding with his position, the last stuttering clicks of a shutter in quick succession. The long lens under his eye clicks and then stops, as if the camera itself has been startled into silence. There is an obscene intimacy to a mauling. It is not tidy. It is not dramatic in the way movies imagine it. It is chaotic and immediate, and close enough that the air seems to compress into a single hot instrument. Those who arrive on the scene describe a commotion of bodies and noise, and then a peculiar hush, a blanking out, as if the valley itself holds its breath. The rangers find gear in a scatter, camera cases unzipped, a tripod toppled like an aborted offering, a lens cap rolling in the grass. They find fabric collapsed into shapes that ache with the absence of the person who had worn it. And then they find, in the way only certain terrible scenes allow, evidence that the life once present has been rearranged into parts. Forensics uses blunt, practical phrases: injuries incompatible with life, severe trauma. There are teeth marks, there is clothing torn and spattered, and there are body parts that are no longer whole. The men and women who handle such scenes learn a professional numbness that is not the absence of feeling, but a careful containment of it. They will catalog, number, photograph, take samples. They will note the behavioral context, the proximity to animals, the condition of the herd. They will mark the place on a map. They will do everything to convert this singular, grotesque event into data. The data is necessary, but it does not make the horror any smaller. Word travels through the valley like smoke. People stop their daily routines. Pilgrims who came for the sunrise pictures find themselves in the middle of a thing that is too large for the normal scripts of tourism. Someone phones home with a voice that is flat and thin. The park administration calls a press conference, assembles a team, draws a boundary line of yellow tape. The herd drifts away because the instincts of wild creatures are older than our shock. Nature continues its business with a stupid, ordered disregard for human meaning. There are questions that will not leave the rangers alone. Had William been close enough to be mistaken for a threat? Had he startled the animals with a noise or a sudden motion? Was the herd on edge already? These are the measured sentences: risk, proximity, habituation, that allow officials to talk without sounding like they do not understand the human pulse. They are also a way of not speaking the painful truth, that a man who loved photographs of life could be reduced to this, torn and scattered by the very animals he admired. The press loves a narrative that fits into the cultural anxieties of the moment: man versus nature, curiosity versus caution, the error of the photographer who believed himself exempt from the dangerous physics of the wild. There is finger-pointing, but it is not always fair to the complexities. There are precedents, other tragedies where humans have been too close for the comfort of wild creatures that, once habituated or once startled, can be lethal. The park has policies. The policies are imperfect, and sometimes those imperfections are fatal. At the core is a sight that cannot be easily unseated from the memory of those who saw it. The medical examiner's report will be technical and even dry, but the witnesses recall things in images, the way a tire of light from a nearby vehicle cut across something that was not a person anymore, the way dogs barked and then fell silent, the sudden small insect-like movement of vultures arriving without shame. There are photographs taken in evidence that are later sealed from the public because of their gruesome nature. The public does not always want to see the mechanics of violence, yet those images are sometimes the only anchors a community has in the face of senseless endings. Friends gather and try to make the world into a narrative that has moral clarity. They remember William the way survivors remember people, through small, human habits that seem to define a life. The way he carried film packets in a plastic bag, the way he liked his coffee bitter, the way he would wait by a wetland for hours for a light to break. They tell stories of him joking at dinner, of his patience, of his capacity for silence. These stories are the human attempt to reassemble someone who has been broken in a manner beyond repair. They bathe him in a continuity of character because continuity is the antithesis of the break the valley made. The park does what the park must do. They collect evidence, brief the family, and issue a cautious bulletin advising visitors to maintain recommended distances. They do not make a spectacle of the death. They are careful with language and mindful of the bereaved. There is a kind of bureaucratic tenderness in their motions, the deliberate, meticulous footing that is meant to be both practical and respectful. But the bureaucratic motions are not consolation. People go on with their grief in private, and grief is an unsparing business. The animal involved, if it could be identified, becomes a problem neither morally reducible nor simple. Those who favor lethal management of dangerous wildlife call for removal. Those who defend wilderness argue for the accommodation of wildness, even when it costs lives. The park's hands are tied between public safety and ecological policy. A single deadly incident like this throws their practices into the spotlight. They will review patrols, signage, and interpretive messages. They will look into whether the animal was habituated to people through previous human behavior, improper disposal of food, too close encounters. Each examination is an attempt to make sense of the imbalance that occurred in a quiet place. In the small human theater of memorials, there are choices made. Friends and family arrange a viewing, a moment of bearing witness. They bring his cameras, the tools that made him who he was, and place them near his hands as if he might still be grateful for these objects that contain his meaning. A coffin is closed. People stand at a graveside and offer words about the hazard of loving beauty too much. They speak of his patience, his eye, his devotion. There is the sense of a life cut suddenly into a line that will not continue, and the pain that comes from not having the future you expected. For the rangers and visitors who witness the aftermath directly, there is a peculiar, lingering alteration. It is not just an intellectual understanding that the wild is not safe. It is a psychological rawness that makes you watch animals with a different kind of carefulness. You find yourself keeping a little more distance, instructing the visitors in ways you might not have imagined necessary before. You correct photographers who edge their tripods, explaining with all the gravity of a person who has seen a life undone why a foot or a step matters. The most mundane lessons become charged with meaning. Always keep a bear canister. Never feed the wildlife. Maintain the distance. Yet there is another, quieter horror that is harder to name. The recognition that beauty and danger live in the same seam line. William had come to photograph the valley's soft terror, the way antlers caught the early light and turned ordinary mouths into something mythic. He wanted to capture fleeting things, to master the fleeting moment into a frame. The world, in returning that desire with a kind of reciprocal violence, created a paradox that stayed with onlookers, a man consumed by what he loved, a composition that refused to be finished without a final, impossible image. Sometimes, standing in the gallery of his work after his death, people find themselves staring longer at certain frames. There's that one of a bison's shoulder turned like a slow mountain against the sky, and the viewer knows now that a man tried to get close enough to catch a reverent portrait and instead entered a field where reverence was not a protection. That knowledge sheds a strange light on his prints. They seem both speaker and eulogy, tender records of a pursuit that would kill him. People peer into the photos and see, behind the beauty, the risk. The images become relics with a new, dangerous context. Time passes, because time is the one instrument that will not pause for sorrow. The valley returns to its seasons, to the same patterns of grazing and migration and sunrise. New photographers come, as always, to chase the light. The rangers alter their patrol schedules and refine their guidance. There are new pamphlets printed. Keep your distance, they say, in clear font. The community debates and moves on in the social sense, but individuals carry the memory with them as a private dent in their sense of safety. A man who had never before eaten lunch thinking about the shape of death now finds himself cautious of any closeness that invites a small but plausible miscalculation. In the quiet hours, there are people who cannot help but imagine the last seconds of a man who believed he was careful. They construct a slow motion of the fall, a camera lowered to the field, a hand reaching to steady, a sudden impression of fur and weight. They imagine the last images on his film, if any remain caught in optical memory, as the camera continued to click in the absence of its owner. The mind wanders there because images are the only thing we have to bind life. They are our small bones against the vast consuming earth. The official file closes in the way files do, a crisp notice, a small box checked. But it will be opened again in possibilities, a reunion of friends at certain anniversaries, a newspaper column remembering him, a gallery show dedicated to his eye. Those rituals do not make the ending less violent, but they allow the living to orient themselves around a point and say, "This happened," which is the human attempt at order. The animal remains part of the wild calculus. The world keeps the death inside a ledger that balances ecology and safety. Rangers tell each new recruit the story as a caution, not to pass blame, but to teach the hard arithmetic of space and risk. They speak of William not as an abstraction, but as a man with an eye and a habit, the precise personification of a classic collision. Those who loved him remember the fullness of his life and the small domestic details that make grief a household thing, a dog that waited for him on the porch, a favorite mug, a propensity for wrong puns. In these small human things he continues ineffably to exist. The valley does not remember in the way humans do. Hayden does not keep grudges. It moves on with seasons that do not consult us. The herds graze and the light still breaks in a way that could make a poet weep. But there is a sliver of knowledge that sits between the way the land looks and how people behave now, that a man with a camera, patient and patient still, can be cut into the same indifferent logic that governs the animal world. The understanding is a kind of humility, cruel but perhaps necessary. People keep going back to Hayden as they always have. They sit for hours and wait. For some, the wait ends well. For others, it ends with the bitter taste of reserve. William's prints hang in galleries, and the world says, in small, careful sentences, that he died doing what he loved. That sentence is both tribute and a kind of terrible final punctuation. The man who made beauty his profession was an unlucky passenger in the valley's long history of indifferent endings. The photograph remains as testimony of the thing he loved and the thing that killed him, both braided forever into the same frame. The drawer lived in the back office of the ranger station, a place even veteran staff entered with a quiet sort of reluctance. It was made of old oak, scarred by years and humidity, its brass label holder worn smooth by fingers that no longer worked these halls. The Rangers called it the archive, though the name felt too formal, too dignified for what it truly was. Inside those folders were people the park had swallowed. Each file held a name that never came back. Luke Sandberg, Kim Cumbo, Stuart Isaac, Bruce Pike, Dennis Johnson, and others whose stories were smaller or messier or quietly devastating in ways that had never made headlines. Each folder was a door left open, waiting for footsteps that never again touched the world. The disappearances stretched back decades, scattered across valleys, trails, ridges, and thermal basins. Yellowstone was not a gentle landscape. It rewarded wonder and punished assumption. Most visitors came for steam and sky and left safely. But every few years, someone simply stepped out of the narrative of their own life and entered another one written by terrain and silence instead of human intent. Ranger Hale was the newest to the station, and like all newcomers, he was told to familiarize himself with the archive. Not to sensationalize it, not to fear it, just to understand it. He opened the drawer late one evening, after radio checks were done and the lobby lights were dim. Wind rattled the windows. The building felt hollow. He pulled a folder at random. Luke Sandberg, age 8, missing 1991, last seen near Old Faithful, separated from family by mere minutes. Search teams combed every boardwalk, every stand of lodgepole pine, every runoff channel. Dogs tracked him for only a short distance before losing the scent altogether, as if he'd simply dissolved into the air. The report ended abruptly. Not found. Hale closed the file and opened another. Start ISAAC 48. Mission 2010. Vehicle found at a trailhead. Tent missing. Tracks leading into backcountry snow, then vanishing in an area with no drop-off, no thermal vent, no reason at all for them to end. A journal entry found in his car read, "The silence here is the loudest thing I've ever heard." Another ending without ending, not found. Hale closed that one too. The more he read, the more the names blurred into a single shape. Different decades, different trails, same conclusion. No remains, no belongings, no resolution. Rangers hated the phrase "vanished without a trace" because journalists used it too easily, but there was no other language for situations where even the ground refused to testify. That night, Hale left the office long after dark. The paths outside were quiet, and the moon carved thin white bones of light along the trees. He looked into the dark timber beyond the station and felt the strange sensation that he was standing before a mouth. Yellowstone was not empty. It simply did not speak. The next morning, Hale hiked with Ranger Moreno to check remote backcountry campsites. Moreno had 20 years in the park and had served through 3 major searches. She didn't talk much about them. Nah, go. But on the trail, with the wind threading through sagebrush and the creek running clear beside them, Hale finally asked, "Why do people disappear here?" he said. Moreno didn't answer at first. Her boots moved steadily, confidently. She scanned the hills with a ranger's practiced caution, reading the landscape the way others read newspapers. "Most don't," she said finally. "A few get careless, a few get unlucky. But some..." She stopped walking. She looked into the trees. "Some just go too far into the quiet." Hale frowned. "What does that mean? You'll understand eventually." It wasn't the answer he wanted, and she knew it. But she didn't offer another. They reached the first campsite and found it undisturbed. Fire ring intact, food pole empty. No signs of wildlife intrusion. They logged the inspection and moved on. The next 2 sites were similar. But late in the afternoon, clouds rolled in thick, heavy, fast, and the trail darkened prematurely. They reached an overlook above a small valley and saw movement, several searchers sweeping the ground in slow lines. Hale hadn't heard of any new missing person alert. He and Moreno descended. A wildlife biologist recognized them and waved them over. "Day 2, she said. "You're welcome to help." Hale exchanged a look with Moreno. "Who?" he asked. The biologist hesitated, then said, "Backpacker. Solo. No radio contact since Tuesday." "I didn't see any bulletin," Hale said. "It only went out a few hours ago." Moreno exhaled sharply, a sound Hale could not interpret. They joined the search line. Hale scanned the ground for impressions, boot prints, broken twigs, bent grass. He found traces leading north, then west, then abruptly stopping near a cluster of boulders. The others found the same pattern. Tracks, then nothing, as if the person had stepped off the earth. The veteran searchers didn't speak. They simply fanned out wider, accustomed to this sickening pattern. Hale followed suit, though unease coiled tight inside him. The storm broke overhead. Rain slashed through the trees, turning soil into dark paste. Radios crackled with static. Someone called out that they'd found a torn strap, possibly from a backpack. But no body, no clothing, no sign of struggle. The storm intensified, lightning forked. Search leaders ordered everyone back to camp. Hale jogged uphill through mud, rain stinging his face. When they reached the ridge, he turned back instinctively, looking at the valley below. The tree line shifted. Not from wind, not from rain, not from rain. Something moved through it, silent, deliberate, too large to be human, too smooth to be animal. Hale blinked rain from his eyes and tried to focus, but the movement slipped behind the dark trunks and was gone. He swallowed hard. Moreno had stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the same place. "You saw it too," Hale whispered. "I saw nothing," she said quickly. Too quickly. They returned to camp, but Hale could not shake the image, the shape, the quiet that followed it, the way the whole valley had seemed to brace itself. Later that night, unable to sleep, Hale returned to the back office. He slid open the archive drawer again. The files whispered against each other like dry leaves. He pulled the oldest one he could find. Bruce Pike, 1968, missing near Yellowstone Lake. Experienced outdoorsman. Planned 3 days. Never returned. Last known location, Shoreline Trail. Searchers found a compass and a length of torn fabric, both unweathered. No sign of animal attack, no sign of struggle. The lake was dragged. Divers searched. Nothing. The final line was handwritten. Footprints ended at the water's edge, but not in the water. As if he walked into the surface and the lake took him. Hale closed the file, heartbeat accelerating. Another folder, Kim Cumbo, 2012, missing at lone. Stargazer witnesses saw her start the trail alone. She was in good spirits. Weather was clear. Small group passed her 15 minutes later. When they reached the geyser, she was no longer on the trail. Her pack was later found leaning against a tree, undamaged, contents undisturbed, no tracks, no noise reported. Not found. Hale shut the drawer abruptly, chest tight. The park was vast, yes, but it wasn't bottomless. People left signs, people left bodies. People left shadows on rock, sweat on bark, hair on branches. But some of them, too many of them, left nothing. He stepped outside for air. The night was still, the sky heavy with stars. The forest pressed close around the station, as if leaning in. He inhaled slowly. A sound drifted from the timberline. Not a howl, not a bear's huff, not wind through branches. A single, low hum, almost a vibration. Almost human. Hale froze. It lasted only a moment, then silence. Moreno stepped out behind him, coffee mug in hand. She followed his gaze into the trees. "You're listening for them," she said. He didn't have to ask who she meant. "Do you ever think," Hale whispered, "that some of those people didn't die?" Moreno swallowed. For the first time, she looked afraid. "No one dies here the way we understand it," she said softly. "Some places erase you. Yellowstone replaces you." The hum came again, farther now, deeper in the woods. Hale stepped back. Moreno didn't move. Her voice fell to a whisper. "They say the ones the park keeps don't fade. They walk at night. They call out. And sometimes they want company." The hum faded. The silence thickened. And Hale finally understood the true horror of the archive drawer. It wasn't a record of the dead. It was a record of the missing. And missing does not always mean gone. Sometimes it means waiting. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means calling back from the dark timberline, where Yellowstone keeps the names that never returned. The summer of 1988 began as if the land had forgotten how to hold water. Snowmelt vanished early. Rivers shrank to narrow silver veins. Grass crisped beneath the hooves of grazing elk. Even the pines seemed to stand differently, rigid, brittle, whispering in a dry language no one recognized at first. By July, the rangers spoke quietly among themselves, glancing at the sky the way sailors watch a darkening sea. Lightning storms came without rain. Winds lifted dust from the roads and spun it into restless ghosts. The forest floor, layered with decades of fallen needles, felt more like tinder than soil. People still visited. Families walked the boardwalks. Campers pitched tents between trees already yellowing at the tips. Children pointed at geysers, steam rising in long ribbons that twisted toward the sky like silent premonitions. No one imagined the season would end with the horizon turning to fire. Not yet. Fire first appeared in small places. A single blaze sparked by lightning near Shoshone, another at Fan Creek. A third near Hell-Roaring Plateau. All manageable, all familiar. Yellowstone had always known fire. Fire shaped the land, cleared the old, nourished the new. Rangers monitored the blazes with controlled patience. They trusted policy. They trusted history. But that year, history failed. The flames did not behave like the models. They traveled faster. They linked together across improbable distances. Winds shifted with strange, sudden violence, as if the air had begun answering to another master entirely. It was said later that the fires created their own weather columns of heat rising so intensely they birthed thunderstorms that spat lightning but withheld rain. By mid-August, smoke began to hang over the valleys like a heavy ceiling. By early September, the sun dimmed to the color of dying citrus. By Black Saturday, the sky itself seemed to open. On the morning of August 20, Ranger Arlen Price left the West District Station believing he knew what fire meant. He'd fought blazes in Montana, Idaho, Oregon. He understood danger, respected it, and trusted the land to give warning before it truly turned against him. But as soon as he stepped outside, he knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, almost liquid. Ash drifted sideways on a wind that didn't move the grass. The horizon glowed faintly, too early for dawn, too red for any ordinary sunrise. Radios crackled with fragments of reports. A fire line broken, a new ignition, a spot fire jumping a ravine no one believed it could cross. Price took his truck, driving through a world that looked bleached of detail. Trees stood as dim silhouettes. Herds of bison moved in slow, uneasy clusters, their dark shapes flickering through haze like creatures crossing between worlds. Further along the road, he saw something stranger. Birds flying low, erratic, colliding with branches and dropping to the ground in exhaustion. The sky was a war zone of heat and ash they could not navigate. At Given Canyon, 2 firefighters waved him down. Behind them, a line of flames climbed the canyon wall, moving with unnatural speed, as if drawn toward some unseen summit. "How the hell is it moving that fast?" one firefighter shouted over the roar. "Winds coming from the opposite direction." Price stared. The flames did not follow the wind. They ignored it. They climbed anyway, driven by heat rising out of the canyon like breath from something waking underground. The radio emitted another burst of static. "Spot fire near Old Faithful. Repeat, fire spotting near Old Faithful." Price swore under his breath and hit the gas. He did not make it far. At Madison Junction, the sky dropped. A thunderhead of smoke rolled overhead, thick and black, pulsing with orange veins. Embers fell like seeds. The air tasted metallic. The temperature rose so suddenly, Price felt his eyelashes prick with heat. Then the wind hit, an immense, unnatural force, slamming from behind, tossing dust and debris across the road. Branches snapped. A dead tree toppled 10 feet from his truck. He braced his hands on the wheel. In that moment, he felt the land turning into something he did not recognize. A place with intention. A place burning not just because of dryness or fuel loads or mismanagement, but because the boundaries between earth and sky had blurred into something volatile and ancient. At Old Faithful, visitors gathered in the parking lot, staring at the plume of smoke rising behind the lodge. Some cried, some filmed with handheld camcorders, some simply gaped, unable to reconcile the iconic geyser basin with the inferno bearing down on it. The lodge itself, massive, wooden, historic, seemed to shrink beneath the approaching firestorm. Rangers moved fast, ushering people into the lobby, directing them to evacuation points. Price arrived breathless, covered in soot. He helped move a group of elderly tourists, shuffling them through the doors as glowing embers rained from the sky. One of the tourists, a gray-haired man clutching a camera, asked, "Is this normal? Is this what fires do?" Price didn't respond. He didn't know how to answer, because fire wasn't supposed to sound like this, like a freight train grinding through the tree line. It wasn't supposed to push down wind that knocked shingles loose. It wasn't supposed to make the earth tremble when a crown of flames devoured the top of a 100-foot lodge pole, and fire wasn't supposed to make shapes. Yet through the smoke, Price saw something. A wall of fire moving with a strange cohesion, almost like a sheet being pulled sideways across the forest. Flames curled and uncurled, forming patterns too synchronized to be random. It reminded him of an animal he had once watched run across the Lamar Valley fluid, powerful, alive. The fire advanced, consuming trees in seconds. Whole crowns vanished with a sound like a gasp. The wind shifted again, slamming against the lodge, The roof caught embers. Firefighters scrambled up ladders to knock them free. "Spotting behind us," someone yelled. Price turned. Another flare ignited 50 yards away, then another, a chain of sparks leaping far beyond the main blaze, as if guided by invisible hands. "Get them inside," a ranger shouted. "Everyone inside!" People rushed in. Price followed, stumbling into the dim safety of the lobby. The great logs of the structure groaned under the pressure of heat outside. For a moment, the world felt wrapped in fire. Someone prayed. Someone else sobbed. A child asked if the fire was alive. Price didn't answer. He didn't need to. The fire answered for him, roaring against the windows like a living throat exhaling rage. Hours passed in a suspended, choking twilight. The fire line shifted, surged, fell back, then advanced again. A miracle of shifting winds spared Old Faithful Inn at the final moment, though parts of the surrounding forest burned to char. But the day was far from over. Elsewhere in the park, chaos unfolded. At Yellowstone Lake, visibility shrank to a few dozen feet. Pelicans circled low, confused, dropping onto the water without aim. Fish floated belly up near the shore, poisoned by ash. In Hayden Valley, bison huddled together, their massive bodies trembling. Some refused to move even when flames approached, as if trapped by ancestral memory older than fear. At the Norris Geyser Basin, a research team reported something unusual: steam vents behaving erratically, pressure readings spiking sharply. As if the geothermal heart of the park had begun to pulse in synchrony with the flames above. "It's like the whole place is breathing," one geologist whispered as steam enveloped their camp. No one disagreed. When the sun finally sank, it was not visible. The sky remained red, then purple, then a bruised black. Darkness came not with calm, but with the weight of remaining embers. Price stood outside the lodge again, long after crowds had been moved to safer zones. His clothing smelled of smoke that would linger for months. His throat burned, his eyes watered. The forest beyond the geyser basin glowed faintly. Not flame, residual heat, like the remains of something that had fed too deeply, too greedily. He listened. No insects. No distant wolves, no rustling from elk or bison. The park was silent, a silence not created by absence, but by exhaustion, a silence that felt older than the land itself. He imagined he heard a low hum in the distance, air moving across smoldering treetops, the hiss of steam escaping from cracked earth. But there was something else layered beneath it, something he could not name, something like breath, something like waiting. Price shivered. He was not the kind of man who scared easily, but the fire had changed something in him. Or perhaps it had revealed something that had always been there, something the land kept to itself until the right season, the right dryness, the right moment. Yellowstone had not simply burned, it had awakened. In the weeks that followed, the fires continued their slow, relentless battle before autumn snows finally quelled them. Nearly 800,000 acres burned. Entire landscapes were remade. Lodgepole forests became blackened pillars. Valleys turned to fields of ash. Animals returned cautiously, as if unsure whether the land would accept them again. Visitors came back too. They walked the trails, stared at the charred remains, took photographs. Some said they felt hope, renewal, the resilience of nature, but the rangers remembered the other parts. The unnatural wind, the fire line moving like a single body, the air pressure that felt like breath, the silence that followed. Price stayed through the season. He patrolled the burn scars, walking through skeletal trees that clicked in the wind like bones knocking together. He found prints, bison, elk, coyote, but also long, smooth trails of scorched earth with no clear origin, as if something large had passed through without leaving detail behind. Every so often, while standing alone in the stillness, he felt watched, not by animals, not by people, by the land itself. The wind would shift, ash would lift, and somewhere in the smoldering remains of the forest, he felt the gaze of something vast and old, something that had stretched itself into flame to remind the world of its presence. Something that could do so again, something that would, when the next dry summer came,